It took Tesla years to understand the truth about manifestation. Not because the truth was hidden, but because his early brilliance moved faster than his internal alignment could stabilize. Long before the world recognized his discoveries, before currents bent to his designs and machines answered his calculations, there existed a quieter struggle that unfolded in isolation. He believed, as many gifted minds do, that intention combined with intellect would be sufficient to bend outcomes into form, yet results arrived unevenly, delayed or distorted, and the gap between expectation and appearance forced a confrontation with an unseen error. This realization did not arrive as revelation, but as friction, repeating itself through failed assumptions and corrected designs until denial was no longer possible. In those early years, Tesla observed that extraordinary mental power did not guarantee immediate translation into physical reality. Precision in thought produced elegant designs, yet manifestation lagged behind vision. He noticed that intense focus sometimes produced exhaustion rather than results, and that effort applied with emotional charge introduced instability into outcomes. The discrepancy was subtle, almost insulting to a disciplined mind accustomed to accuracy. Intelligence insisted the method was sound, while experience reported otherwise. This contradiction marked the beginning of a long internal recalibration, one that required surrendering the comfort of early certainty in favor of patient examination. The inventor once assumed that desire itself carried force, that clarity of wanting would naturally compel the universe to respond. Years of disciplined observation dismantled that assumption. Desire appeared powerful but behaved inconsistently, amplifying tension more reliably than outcome. When desire intensified, results often scattered or arrived malformed, as though the signal itself fractured under pressure. Tesla recognized that something in the mechanism was being misunderstood, not by others but by himself. The realization emerged slowly, through repeated exposure to the same failure wearing different disguises, each demanding the same correction. Isolation sharpened this awareness. Removed from applause and misunderstanding alike, Tesla confronted the uncomfortable fact that forceful intention often worked against coherence. The mind could generate images with remarkable clarity, yet clarity alone failed to secure arrival. Something beneath thought was interfering, something that logic could not override. This marked the moment where intellect ceased to dominate the inquiry, and discipline took its place. The question shifted from how strongly one wants to why outcomes resist even perfect conceptualization. That shift would define the years that followed. Tesla began to suspect that manifestation was not responsive to thought itself, but to a deeper condition underlying thought. This suspicion unsettled earlier confidence and demanded a different posture toward experimentation. Rather than pushing harder, attention turned inward, toward the state from which intention emerged. It became apparent that internal contradiction could coexist with precise thinking, and that contradiction behaved like interference within a circuit. The mind could transmit a command, but the signal degraded before reaching form. Desire, once trusted as fuel, now appeared as potential noise. This realization required humility, not as a moral virtue, but as a mechanical necessity. Errors persisted until they were named without defense. Tesla recognized that early confidence had obscured a subtle misalignment between internal state and external result. Manifestation did not fail randomly. It failed predictably when effort carried strain, urgency, or expectation of immediate reward. Each instance reinforced the same conclusion. Intelligence accelerates discovery only when the internal environment is stable enough to sustain transmission. Years passed before this error lost its authority. Each correction required restraint, rather than addition, subtraction rather than force. Tesla learned that the universe does not respond to demand, but to consistency, and that consistency cannot coexist with inner turbulence. The recognition arrived without drama, settling into place as an unavoidable conclusion drawn from experience rather than belief. Manifestation was lawful, but the law had been misapplied. Understanding this did not arrive early, because it required failure without resentment, observation without urgency, and discipline without self-deception. The truth that emerged, did not flatter ambition, nor did it reward impatience. It revealed that manifestation obeys order rather than desire, and that error persists until alignment replaces effort. This truth would govern everything that followed, reshaping how intention was formed, sustained, and released. What appeared as delay was not resistance, and what felt like denial was often correction in disguise. Only when the error was fully understood could the mechanism operate without distortion. Manifestation fails until internal assumptions are corrected. Tesla came to understand that desire alone produces nothing, because desire, when isolated, lacks structure. Wanting generates motion, but motion without direction dissipates. In his experiments, he observed that systems driven by excess input without regulation overheated, fractured, or collapsed into inefficiency. The same principle revealed itself inwardly. Desire intensified focus, but it also introduced agitation. The mind became crowded with outcome fixation, and this fixation destabilized the internal conditions required for consistent transmission. Desire promised acceleration, yet repeatedly produced delay. What misled so many was that desire felt active. It created the sensation of participation, of effort being applied toward an end. Tesla noted that this sensation often replaced actual alignment. The individual believed work was being done simply because emotion was engaged. Yet emotion, when ungoverned, behaved like fluctuating current. It surged and dropped, distorted signals, and interrupted continuity. The system remained busy while producing no coherent output. Desire alone mimicked progress while preventing it. He observed that desire often concealed contradiction. A person could want an outcome while simultaneously fearing its arrival, doubting its legitimacy, or resenting the time required for its formation. These opposing states coexisted beneath conscious awareness, creating a divided signal. Tesla recognized that no machine responds accurately to conflicting instructions. When internal commands oppose one another, the response cannot stabilize. Desire, unexamined, amplified these contradictions rather than resolving them. The inventor understood that desire is inherently future-oriented. It places fulfillment ahead of the present moment, and this temporal displacement weakens coherence. Attention moves away from current state toward imagined arrival, generating impatience. Impatience then interferes with the conditions necessary for formation. Tesla noticed that systems require steady states to produce reliable outcomes. Desire disrupts steadiness by insisting on premature result. The insistence itself becomes resistance. Another error emerged in the belief that intensity equaled effectiveness. Tesla saw that greater emotional charge did not strengthen manifestation, it fragmented it. High intensity shortened tolerance for delay and increased sensitivity to absence. Each moment without result reinforced doubt, and doubt altered internal frequency. The system oscillated instead of stabilizing. Desire fed upon itself, becoming louder while less precise. Precision, not volume, governs response. He recognized that desire often substitutes longing for preparation. Individuals imagine reception without embodying readiness. Tesla understood that every outcome demands a corresponding internal condition. Without that condition, desire becomes incompatible with reception. The universe does not deny, it delays until equivalence exists. Desire without preparation attempts to draw form without having established capacity. This mismatch guarantees frustration. Tesla also observed that desire personalizes outcome. It attaches identity, worth, and urgency to result. This attachment tightens emotional involvement and reduces neutrality. Neutrality, he discovered, was essential for signal clarity. Desire compromised neutrality by binding self-evaluation to manifestation timing. The moment outcome became a measure of value. Internal stability collapsed. The signal was no longer clean. Over time, it became evident that desire initiates inquiry, but cannot complete formation. Desire signals direction, not execution. When mistaken for mechanism, it obstructs the very process it seeks to accelerate. Tesla learned that wanting must yield to calibration. Only when desire quieted into expectancy could conditions stabilize. Expectancy differed from longing in that it required no tension. It assumed order rather than demanding proof. This understanding dismantled a foundational myth that strong desire attracts fulfillment. Tesla saw instead that desire must be refined into coherence. Without refinement, desire generates noise. With refinement, it becomes orientation rather than pressure. The transition from desire to alignment marked a turning point. Manifestation began to respond not to intensity, but to consistency. Desire without coherence produces no result. Tesla's correction deepened when attention shifted from emotion to mechanics, from wanting to transmission. What governed manifestation was not desire but frequency, and frequency preceded every visible effect. He observed that energy never moved randomly. It responded to rhythm, coherence, and state. Before a form appeared, a condition had to be sustained. Matter followed patterns already established in the unseen. Thought, therefore, was not a command but a carrier. Its effectiveness depended entirely on the state in which it was generated and maintained. He understood that frequency was not metaphorical. Every system possessed a natural rate of oscillation, and when that rate was disturbed, efficiency collapsed. The human nervous system behaved no differently. When thought emerged from agitation, urgency, or emotional imbalance, it carried distortion. The message degraded before it could organize matter. Manifestation failed, not because thought lacked power, but because its transmission was incoherent. Energy responded faithfully, but to the distorted signal it received. Tesla recognized that energy always preceded structure. Before a circuit produced current, its configuration had to be stable. Before a machine performed work, its components required alignment. The same law applied inwardly. Thought alone was insufficient unless it emerged from a stabilized internal field. Frequency was established not by words but by sustained internal condition. This condition could not be forced. It had to be regulated. He observed that frequency behaved impersonally. It did not reward hope or punish doubt. It simply responded to consistency. When internal states fluctuated, outcomes fluctuated. When states stabilized, outcomes followed with reliability. This realization eliminated superstition. Manifestation ceased to be mysterious and became mechanical. The universe responded to what was maintained, not to what was imagined briefly or intensely. Tesla also discovered that frequency was cumulative. A single coherent thought had limited effect, but repeated coherence altered baseline state. Over time, the nervous system adapted, perception reorganized, and behavior shifted accordingly. Manifestation appeared gradual only because frequency required duration to dominate. Short exposure produced negligible change. Sustained exposure restructured the system. This explained delay without invoking resistance. He noted that frequency operated beneath conscious intention. A person could speak affirmations while maintaining internal contradiction. Words transmitted one signal while emotion transmitted another. Energy responded to the dominant frequency, not the declared one. Tesla saw that manifestation obeyed what was lived internally, not what was verbally asserted. This explained why disciplined repetition without internal regulation failed to produce effect. The inventor concluded that thought functioned as a transmitter, not a generator. Energy already existed in abundance. The task was not to create it, but to shape its pattern. When the internal field stabilized, energy organized naturally. Manifestation occurred as consequence, not as event. The visible world rearranged itself according to the invisible order already established. This realization marked a decisive shift. Manifestation was no longer approached through effort or belief, but through calibration. Frequency became the true cause, and thought became its expression. Once this hierarchy was understood, error diminished. The mechanism revealed itself as lawful, indifferent, and precise. Results ceased to surprise. They followed inevitably. Frequency precedes form and governs manifestation. As understanding deepened, Tesla identified internal conflict as the most persistent source of distortion in manifestation. The mind could hold a concept with clarity while the body resisted its implications. This resistance rarely announced itself openly. It appeared as impatience, doubt masked as caution, or urgency disguised as discipline. Each introduced instability into the internal field. Tesla observed that when internal states contradicted intention, energy fractured. The signal weakened not from lack of strength, but from interference generated within the system itself. He recognized that doubt functioned as a secondary command, running parallel to intention. While intention projected direction, doubt questioned legitimacy, timing, or worthiness. These parallel transmissions produced cancellation. The system oscillated between advance and retreat, creating stagnation. Tesla noted that manifestation did not judge doubt as failure. It simply responded to the dominant frequency. When doubt persisted, it recalibrated outcome toward delay. The universe reflected conflict with precision. Impatience emerged as another form of distortion. Tesla saw impatience not as eagerness, but as rejection of process. It introduced pressure into the internal environment, compressing time artificially. This compression destabilized frequency. Systems forced beyond natural sequence produced heat, friction, and error. Manifestation obeyed order, not demand. Impatience attempted to bypass sequence, and in doing so disrupted coherence. The result was signal noise rather than acceleration. Tesla also observed that emotional investment intensified distortion. Attachment to outcome increased sensitivity to absence. Each moment without visible confirmation reinforced internal tension. That tension altered frequency continuously, preventing stabilization. The internal state became reactive rather than regulated. Tesla understood that no system could maintain coherence under constant fluctuation. Manifestation required sustained equilibrium, not emotional oscillation. Contradiction often arose from identity conflict. A person could desire a condition while unconsciously identifying with its absence. Familiar struggle provided psychological continuity, even as the conscious mind sought resolution. Tesla saw that manifestation required identity alignment. When identity lagged behind intention, the internal signal fractured. Energy responded to the deeper identification, not the declared objective. This explained repeated cycles of near arrival followed by reversal. He noticed that internal conflict was frequently reinforced by observation. Watching for results introduced evaluation into the system. Evaluation altered frequency by shifting attention from maintenance to measurement. Tesla recognized that measurement belonged after stabilization, not during. Premature evaluation disrupted equilibrium. The act of checking introduced doubt, and doubt altered signal quality. Manifestation responded by postponing outcome until observation ceased interfering. Tesla understood that internal conflict was not moral failure, but mechanical interference. It required correction through regulation, not condemnation. The solution was not suppression of doubt or impatience, but their neutralization through steadiness. When internal states aligned without strain, frequency stabilized. Manifestation responded predictably. The absence of conflict restored signal clarity. This realization clarified why many efforts failed, despite disciplined repetition. Repetition without coherence amplified distortion. Tesla learned that alignment preceded repetition. Only when internal noise diminished could repetition reinforce stability. Manifestation ceased to respond to effort and began responding to consistency. The correction required restraint rather than force. Internal conflict distorts signal and delays manifestation. Tesla's understanding shifted decisively. When imagination was no longer treated as fantasy, but as a calibration mechanism. He had long possessed an unusual capacity to visualize with precision, constructing entire machines within the mind and testing them there before committing a single component to physical space. For years, this ability was regarded merely as an intellectual advantage. Only later did it become clear that imagination functioned as a tuning process, shaping internal coherence before external form could emerge. Imagination was not escapism, it was alignment rehearsal. He observed that uncontrolled imagination behaved erratically. When images arose impulsively, driven by longing or fear, they produced instability. The mind jumped between scenarios, reinforcing emotional fluctuation rather than coherence. Tesla recognized that such imagination amplified noise. It multiplied internal movement without direction. This explained why daydreaming failed to produce manifestation. Imagination without discipline scattered energy rather than organizing it. The correction came when imagination was applied deliberately and sparingly. Tesla learned that a single coherent image, held without emotional strain, exerted more influence than countless vivid fantasies. The key was control. When imagery was constructed calmly, without urgency, the nervous system responded by adjusting posture, breathing, and attention. These adjustments altered internal frequency. The body aligned with the image, and the image ceased to be abstract. It became a reference state. He understood that imagination served as a bridge between thought and sensation. Words described intention, but imagery trained response. When imagery was repeated in a regulated state, the internal system adopted it as familiar. Familiarity dissolved resistance. Tesla noticed that when an image felt ordinary rather than exciting, coherence increased. Manifestation favored what was internally normalized over what was emotionally charged. Imagination also functioned as error correction. Tesla used it to identify contradiction within intention. If an image produced tension, aversion, or hesitation, it revealed misalignment. Rather than forcing continuation, the image was adjusted until neutrality returned. This process refined internal signal quality. Imagination became diagnostic rather than decorative. It exposed distortion before distortion reached form. He observed that imagination influenced behavior subtly and continuously. When an internal image stabilized, actions began to reorganize without conscious effort. Decisions aligned naturally. Timing improved. Opportunities were recognized rather than sought. Manifestation appeared less dramatic, yet more reliable. The image did not summon outcome, it prepared the system to receive it. Tesla also understood that imagination required limitation. Excessive imagery overwhelmed the system. Only one configuration could be stabilized at a time. Attempts to visualize multiple outcomes introduced conflict. He learned to hold one image until it no longer required effort. Once internal alignment completed, imagination could be released. Persistence beyond coherence produced diminishing returns. The inventor realized that imagination was most effective when detached from expectation. When imagery was treated as calibration rather than demand, emotional neutrality was preserved. The system remained stable. Manifestation proceeded according to sequence. Imagination set the condition. Reality responded in its own time. This removed frustration and restored trust in process. Through this refinement, imagination ceased to be a hopeful exercise and became a technical tool. It shaped frequency by shaping internal state. Tesla recognized that mastery of imagination did not require vividness, but precision and calm. When imagery stabilized frequency, manifestation followed without effort. The mechanism was exact, repeatable, and impersonal. Imagination calibrates frequency when held without strain. Tesla's understanding matured further when attention turned to time, not as an obstacle but as a necessary sequence within manifestation. Early impatience had framed delay as failure, yet repeated observation revealed a different pattern. Effects did not appear randomly, they unfolded according to order. Every system required a period of internal organization before visible expression could occur. What appeared as waiting was often preparation occurring beyond immediate perception. Time, rather than resisting manifestation, served as its organizing medium. He recognized that nature never rushed its own processes. Seeds did not argue with soil, nor did circuits demand current before configuration was complete. Manifestation followed the same logic. When internal frequency stabilized, form did not appear instantly because stabilization initiated sequence, not conclusion. Tesla understood that delay signaled progression through stages invisible to impatient observation. Attempting to compress time disrupted this sequence and forced instability back into the system. Tesla observed that premature effort often reset progress. Interference during gestation destabilized internal coherence. Monitoring for results reintroduced doubt. Adjusting intention mid-process fractured signal continuity. The system required uninterrupted maintenance to complete formation. Time protected this process by enforcing distance between initiation and outcome. This distance prevented emotional interference from collapsing coherence prematurely. He realized that time functioned as a filter. Only signals sustained beyond emotional fluctuations survived long enough to manifest. Transient intentions dissolved naturally. Sustained frequency passed through temporal sequence and acquired form. Time did not test worthiness. It tested stability. What endured internally eventually appeared externally. What fluctuated dissolved without consequence. Tesla also recognized that perception of slowness originated from expectation rather than reality. When expectation fixed outcome to a specific moment, delay felt antagonistic. When expectation released timing, sequence became observable. Manifestation proceeded with precision once observation ceased, demanding immediacy. Tesla learned that patience was not passive. It was an active maintenance of internal state without interference. He understood that time also allowed alignment between internal change and external environment. Conditions beyond the individual adjusted concurrently. Relationships, resources, and circumstances reorganized gradually to match stabilized frequency. Immediate manifestation would disrupt this synchronization. Time ensured coherence across systems. The delay preserved order. Tesla noted that trust in sequence reduced internal noise. When timing was no longer contested, internal conflict diminished. The system stabilized further. Manifestation accelerated naturally without force. This revealed a paradox. Releasing urgency shortened delay. Time responded to stability by contracting perceived duration. What once felt prolonged arrived quietly. Through this understanding, time ceased to feel adversarial. It became an ally, ensuring proper emergence. Tesla recognized that manifestation obeyed sequence before speed. Attempts to override this law produced distortion. Respecting it restored inevitability. The mechanism required patience not as virtue, but as operational necessity. Manifestation unfolds through sequence, not force. Tesla's final correction before inevitability emerged through detachment, not withdrawal from desire, but release from emotional dependence on outcome. He observed that emotional neutrality stabilized frequency more effectively than enthusiasm or longing. When expectations softened into quiet certainty, internal fluctuations diminished. The system maintained coherence without effort. Detachment did not signal disinterest. It signaled completion of internal alignment. Once alignment stabilized, emotional reinforcement became unnecessary and even disruptive. He recognized that attachment tethered attention to result rather than state. The moment outcome became emotionally charged, observation intensified. Observation reintroduced measurement, and measurement altered frequency. Detachment removed the impulse to monitor. Without monitoring, internal conditions remained undisturbed. Manifestation progressed uninterrupted. Tesla noted that neutrality preserved signal clarity by eliminating reactive adjustment. Tesla also understood that detachment protected against disappointment. Disappointment was not emotional weakness, but energetic disturbance. When outcome timing failed to match expectation, disappointment altered internal state abruptly. That alteration destabilized frequency and reset progress. Detachment prevented this cycle. By disengaging emotional response from timing, internal stability endured across delay. Manifestation continued unaffected. He observed that emotional neutrality increased tolerance for uncertainty. Uncertainty no longer produced agitation. Instead, it became part of sequence. Tesla saw that certainty did not require evidence. It required internal consistency. Detachment allowed certainty to exist without confirmation. This internal certainty generated steadiness that desire alone could not sustain. Tesla also noted that detachment altered perception of effort. Actions continued, but without strain. Work became rhythmic rather than forced. Decisions aligned naturally with intention. There was no urgency to accelerate. Neutral expectation preserved energy. Manifestation responded with proportional ease. The absence of emotional turbulence reduced friction. He recognized that detachment was often mistaken for apathy. In truth, it was disciplined restraint. Detachment maintained internal order by preventing emotional spikes. Tesla understood that spikes destabilized frequency. Stability required flattening extremes. Calm expectation provided a consistent baseline from which manifestation could emerge reliably. Detachment also dissolved fear of loss. Fear of loss. Fear introduced anticipatory resistance. Resistance altered frequency defensively. Tesla saw that fear and attachment were inversely related to stability. When attachment dissolved, fear followed. The internal field became quieter. Manifestation responded to this quietude with increased precision. Through detachment, Tesla observed that manifestation no longer felt effortful. Results appeared proportional to maintenance rather than intensity. This revealed that emotional neutrality was not passive. It was active preservation of coherence. Detachment stabilized signal by removing unnecessary modulation. Once stabilized, manifestation became predictable. Detachment stabilizes signal and preserves manifestation. Tesla reached the final understanding, not through accumulation, but through subtraction. What remained after correction was simple, exact, and unavoidable. Manifestation was not an act, nor a technique, nor a moment of effort. It was the natural consequence of a stabilized internal condition maintained without contradiction over time. Once frequency settled into coherence and remained undisturbed, outcome could no longer fail to appear. Failure only existed where instability persisted. When instability ended, inevitability began. He saw clearly that manifestation did not respond to hope, belief, or repetition in isolation. It responded to sustained internal order. Once the internal environment reached equilibrium, external conditions reorganized accordingly. This reorganization did not require supervision. It proceeded independently, as all lawful processes do. Tesla understood that the universe required no persuasion. It required clarity. When clarity existed, response followed as effect follows cause. This understanding dissolved effort entirely. There was nothing left to push. The internal system, once stabilized, functioned automatically. Thoughts no longer competed. Emotions no longer interfered. Imagination no longer strained. Desire no longer pressured. Time no longer resisted. Detachment no longer required discipline. All mechanisms aligned into a single state of coherence. From that state, manifestation occurred without announcement or struggle. Tesla recognized that inevitability was not dramatic. It was quiet, almost anticlimactic. Outcomes arrived without the emotional surge anticipated by earlier desire. The arrival felt ordinary because it had already been integrated internally. Manifestation simply confirmed what was already established. This explained why fulfilled outcomes often felt less impactful than imagined. The experience had been completed long before form appeared. He understood that this inevitability could not be forced or hurried. Any attempt to accelerate reintroduced instability. Manifestation became inevitable only when the individual ceased interfering with the mechanism. Interference always originated internally. Removing interference restored order. Order produced result. This sequence did not vary. Tesla also recognized that this truth applied universally. It was not reserved for invention, wealth, or discovery. It governed health, circumstance, opportunity, and relationship. Wherever internal coherence stabilized, external coherence followed. Wherever contradiction persisted, manifestation fragmented. The law operated without exception or favoritism. The final correction was acceptance of impersonality. Manifestation was not personal reward or punishment. It was mechanical response. This removed blame and pride alike. Tesla saw that mastery required neither struggle nor surrender, but alignment. Once alignment was achieved, manifestation no longer depended on vigilance. It unfolded autonomously. This understanding ended the search. There was no further refinement required. The mechanism was complete. What once took years of correction resolved into a single operational truth. Manifestation became inevitable, not because effort increased, but because disturbance ceased. Stability replaced striving. Law replaced hope. Internal stability makes manifestation inevitable,